I'm Travis Smith with Higher Ed Athletics, and I'm here with Jamie Pollard, Athletic Director, Iowa State University. Jamie, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Travis.
Well, I always like to start by just asking kind of a campus profile. So if you had to describe, what's a great way to describe Ames, Iowa and Iowa State University?
The word that comes to mind is wholesome. I think Ames, Iowa and Iowa State are still kind of a small little utopia that is carved out in a world of chaos. That there's still a lot of values and really good people here, and it's it's a wholesome environment.
Well, doing some research for this, I really liked your communication strategy. You've been putting out for a long time now, like 10 plus minute videos on YouTube, seeing everything from the difficult things of announcing a men's basketball change, a video to fans on the post-pandemic future of the department, among other things. How long have you been doing this type of open communication? What has kind of been the feedback, both good and bad, from maybe your donors or just fans in general?
Well, I think it really goes back, Travis, 17 years ago. An individual that came with me on my initial staff from Wisconsin was Steve Melchow. And Steve had been the longtime SID both at Iowa and at Wisconsin for Coach Alvarez. And then when Coach Alvarez became AD, Steve came to our senior executive staff. And when Steve came with me to Iowa State, we kind of billed it as almost like he was the SID for the AD. And at that time, we might have been the only school in the country that had somebody on senior staff that, there was always a communications person for the football coach and the basketball coach, but not necessarily designated for the AD. And I think that put in motion from day one, Travis, a commitment on our part to being very communicative in everything we did. And that continued to be enhanced over time, all the way forward up to what you referenced, COVID and the video messaging. I think what happened for me during COVID, we started using video to do a lot of things, right? To communicate with staff because you couldn't be with them. And it just like a light bulb went off that said, well, we have this ability to take our message directly to whom we want to take it to. And you can show so much more personality by adding video versus just a letter. Or when I remember when the phone technology happened where you could leave a message where it made it sound like I was calling everybody personally, but it went to 50,000 people. And so we started using that video piece and got just really good feedback from folks because, they can see your pain. They can see your excitement. They can see your anxiety. And I think that was really helpful in painting the proper picture for whatever the message was.
Yeah, and one of the ones that stuck out, I saw this, we had a lot of announcements come out around COVID and then just big things happening. President Wintersteen joined you for a video long after the Oklahoma and Texas announcement. And it seemed like the idea was to, unified front of the athletic director and the president, because you were all you're the CEOs of athletics in higher education. So I like that. I've watched President Wintersteen on the University Innovation Alliance and some other videos in the past, and it kind of got me thinking about her tenure. So I looked in to see how long she had been there. So it got me curious. Did you know or work with her in other roles at the university that she had prior to the presidency that may have either helped her understanding of athletics or her understanding of the importance of athletics on the ISU community, because she had been there as multiple different roles at the university? And it seems like she's a president that really understood the importance of being there with you in a video setting like that at a very crucial time for the conference.
Well, so yes, she'd been here as a dean for a long time. We didn't interact directly. Obviously knew who each other were and had some common friends. She has been a long time, big time supporter of our women's basketball program. Her and her husband were always at women's basketball games, back to when she was probably even before she was a dean. But, truth be told, the athletic space is not her, that's not her comfort zone. But Iowa State people definitely are her comfort zone. And so that particular quote fireside chat, and I jokingly say that because when we went over to film it, we were like, well, where do you want to do it? And then all of a sudden we were like, well, there's the fireplace here. Let's just do it in front of the fireplace. And so it became a fireplace chat. But she recognized the value of our being a united front and helping calm donors that were going to have a lot of anxiety at that time. But she also, she is really good for somebody that, she's the president. I report to her, but yet she's very comfortable deferring to, me in an area where she doesn't have that area of expertise. And I think all leaders can learn from that, because there's areas in our own athletics department where I'm not the resident expert, and I got to lean into our people and let them do what they need to do, but be there to be supportive. And that's exactly what she did in that particular moment. She was there, initially before the cameras went on, she was a little uncomfortable because it's not a space that she, is natural for her, talking about Texas and Oklahoma and the Big 12 alignment. But she did a fabulous job, and her mere presence in that video was the value, not anything she probably said. It just was her being there, that we had a unified front at Iowa State between the president and the athletic director.
Yeah, like I said, I had recognized her from other interviews she had done with the UIA, a consortium that the institution's a part of. And so right when I saw that come out, I was like, wow, it's the first time I've really seen a president and AD aligned on a video. And so I just really appreciate that communication strategy. Keeping with some exciting changes that are happening on campus for the whole institution, under construction with some incredible facilities and planning and entertainment art district. I saw the bridge too, and so I've seen some updates on Twitter. I don't think you are ready to share too many plans about the entertainment and arts district from trying to find more information. If you are, then I'd love to hear more about it. But what I'm really looking for is just the purpose of the district and the idea behind it. And then what has the planning process been for university-wide to actually do a project like this?
Well, so, the purpose of it really goes back 50 years. 50 years ago, James Hilton was the university president. He had this vision of an performing arts center, a basketball arena, a conference center. And he, was able to move forward with it and had these facilities built kind of out in the swamp area that, now is heart of campus, but back then it wasn't. And 50 years ago, Iowa State was not just in the state, but in the Midwest. That was the destination for concerts and, conventions, because every small town and municipality didn't have its own convention center. Well, 50 years later, unfortunately, what happened at Iowa State is what happens at a lot of state institutions. We're really good at building things, but we're terrible at maintaining things. We get the money raised to build them, but then, we don't replenish them. Our deferred maintenance is horrible. And so 50 years later, the campus was kind of stuck with these facilities that are outdated. The business model, is no longer relevant, and no plan forward. At the same time, athletics had kind of built up in and around that space with our football stadium, the basketball arena, our access to want to use parking lots for donor parking. And so both of us kind of had this need. They had a need for, well, what's the plan going forward with this? Used to be a huge outreach asset for the institution that now isn't an outreach asset any longer, and for the community. And it's kind of crumbling. At the same time, athletics, we needed new inventory to continue to feed the fire that we've got going from donors and, events. And so we put our heads together. And what we identified was if we could think about this differently and possibly create some new revenue streams through the entertainment district, kind of essentially repurpose that land, we could accomplish several major goals. Number one, we could replenish the infrastructure. Number two, we could use it to attract, retain students, faculty, visitors to the city, that we could create this vibrant place, an innovation area for the campus to really kind of be revitalized and to do it in a way that we're helping town and gown and helping the local community. And so those are the goals. And we're continuing to work really hard on it. We'll be going to the Board of Regents here in June for the first phase of the infrastructure. And so these projects don't happen overnight. I'm an activator. So when we took it on, I want to prove to all the doubters that, we got this. But, it's not a project that you're just going to snap your fingers and get it done overnight, because it's basically a development project. And, that's not an area of expertise for this athletics director. So I'm having to lean into some other folks.
You mentioned the Board of Trustees. I feel like that's a lot of times people don't realize that all these big plans that college athletic leaders have, you have to get them approved typically by the Board of Trustees. Just kind of a follow-up on that comment. Whenever you are preparing to deliver something to the board, what's kind of your strategy leading up to the event, as far as if you have to do a presentation or just understanding the facts? I'm guessing you lean on your staff and put something together, but what would be your advice there on your process?
Well, number one, you got to be accurate with what you're taking forward, because, the board consists of, some very smart individuals. Many of them are business leaders, so you're not going to fool them. So you better have your facts, your ducks in a row, so to speak. And then secondly, you have to have a strategy of how you're packaging it. What is the messaging behind, what's the why? As you said, what are the goals? What's the how? What's the when? And how are you putting that all together in a strategy that allows you to communicate it? Because as soon as it goes to the board, it becomes public document in a state environment. And so you better be ready to, answer to your constituents that are going to be asking questions about it. So you better be accurate. You got to be strategic on the, what, when, why, how, and then you better be prepared to be able to, share it from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I like to try and extract those tactical parts whenever I hear comments like that, so I appreciate it. Kind of keeping with the theme of changes, and you also announced a change to the student section for football games starting with the 22 season. Why the change in relocating the student section at your football stadium?
Bottom line, it just comes down to a safety issue. When Coach Campbell came here 6 years ago, our bench was on that side, so our students were behind that side of the bench. 4 years ago, we switched sides. Coach Campbell wanted to be on the press box side, which is the normal side for home teams, which then put our student body behind the visiting team bench. Unfortunately, in our stadium, the only way to the locker room is in front of that student section. And so it started 4 years ago when we beat TCU and the students rushed the field, and it was, really put the TCU players and coaches, in the middle of a mosh pit. And, nothing bad happened, but it did raise some issues in the Big 12. We ended up getting fined. And then it's happened several more times when we've had some big wins. And the more we studied it, the more we just started to feel like we can't. It's our responsibility. If we were the visiting team in that situation, I would not be happy with the home team because of that, not because of how hard we were trying to protect them, but physically you just can't because of where that locker room is. And so we talked about it amongst our student leadership group. We talked with event management, campus police, whole host of different football staff, football players, and ultimately decided we have a responsibility to address this. And so we looked at different places we could move the student section to, and the area we chose was the best because it allowed us to keep the students, on the TV side. It still allows the student section to be it actually gives the student section a few more seats, but it allows the students still to enter from the same side of the stadium. So it was just the best solution. But you had to figure out, much like we talked about with the Board of Regents, you got to explain what, why, how, and then you got to implement it. And so we're in the middle of implementing it.
After such a decision, part of that, just kind of curious for ticketing folks, yep. Would your season ticket holders that were, or just ticketing in general for the rest of the stadium where you moved it, did that kind of take some reshuffling things around when you looked at finding the student section where it could fit? You obviously had some criteria that you wanted them to be on the same entrance, which is just a good logistical idea, and then also to be on TV. What happened with the seats that you moved to and from? Did you just have to kind of just shift things around? And was that kind of a headache, or was that a pretty easy transition just for people that might go through a similar process?
Well, Travis, depends who you're asking. If you're asking my ticket staff, they'd probably say it's a headache because they've got to do it individually. But they were part of the developing the plan. So what we're doing is there'll be individual calls to each one of the ticket holders that has to move, and they'll have options to choose of where they can sit. We're giving all individuals in those seats a 3-year price lock, so that if they choose a seat location that costs more than the seat that they are currently in, for the next 3 years, they'll still get to just pay the price that they would have paid. And we're doing that more of just a sign of, hey, we're doing this to you and we're sorry. We've got to do this, but we recognize it's an inconvenience to you. Many of them will have the opportunity to upgrade because there'll be seats that now where the student section were that, are closer to the 40 or the 35-yard line, where most of those seats, are down in the 20, 10 or in the corner of the end zone. So there'll be some fans that'll come out of this better. And for 3 years, they won't have to pay any extra to be better.
Yeah, and I'm sure they appreciate the story that you said that it's a safety thing and the how, why, and I bet they appreciated that. And then you say, oh, you might actually get more affordable pricing being locked in, and then also, hey, your seats are better. I'd say that could be a pretty good option for some of those people. So I'm sure they appreciated that.
Well, we hope so. Again, it's everybody always looks at it through their own particular eyes. And, until they find out where they're going to go and, what those options are, I think there's some anxiety, but we'll get through it.
Well, I want to kind of shift gears to this concern that there's a lot of talk about collectives, NIL collectives, and just the changes going on in the industry. Every day there's something new that kind of maybe is either breaking news or something that athletic directors have to wrestle with. Just curious, is there a legitimate concern among athletic directors that donors and businesses might continue to invest in their more money into an NIL collective or whatever the next term is for collectives for competitive recruiting instead of that traditional fundraising arm for the department that you need to operate and get by with the infrastructure changes you might need, or just the day-to-day of paying your staff and taking care of the cost of running an athletic department?
Well, I would say there is concern because I read about it, on all the different sources of information where when we hear other athletics directors talking. I'm not overly concerned about it, but I'm responsible for the Iowa State culture, and we feel really good about our situation, our culture, our coaches, much like we did back in COVID. That we're going to be able to weather this. We just need to weather it and stay calm and provide leadership to our fans. We have a collective that's been formed. I've been doing this for 20 some years. I know how hard it is to raise money. People don't just give away money. You have to cultivate them. You've got to steward them. And so I'm not overly worried at Iowa State because of the culture we already have had. I'm not naive enough to think that there weren't student athletes already being paid by some schools. We have some well-documented cases of that already. But they were getting paid in the dark of night. And now, the sun is shining bright and, directly, because it's now, quote, legal to do that under the guise of NIL. And I think there's a lot of schools now kind of bragging about maybe what they already were doing in the dark of night. We weren't one of them, and we'll never be one of them. And so I feel comfortable with our culture over the next 2 to 3 years that we'll weather this perceived storm. And I don't see, tangible dollars being splintered off. Do I support the collective? I respect the collective as a vehicle to help us at Iowa State supplement NIL opportunities for current athletes on our rosters. But, I've got a football and a men's basketball coach that have both publicly said they have absolutely zero interest in having anybody in their locker room that got paid to be in the locker room. Got a coach that have said the day that happens is the day he goes and coaches Division III. So, we've had a culture of winning at Iowa State by getting the right people. And, I had the opportunity this past week and a half to meet with 4 basketball players and their family members that are coming to Iowa State that look at Iowa State and the Big 12 as a huge opportunity to showcase themselves as transfer students, and not a one was asking for $1.
That's great to hear those comments. We don't often get that perspective of the athletic director's perspective on the idea of collectives. So I appreciate willingness to talk with that. You mentioned Big 12. Lots of talk about what Oklahoma and Texas leaving will do to the Big 12, but not as much about the additions of the 4 schools that are joining. So being in the industry as long as you have been and understanding college athletics, serving on committees, you're going to know all these schools across the country to some level. So what excites you about adding BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF to the Big 12?
Well, let's just start with the fact that those 4 schools are ecstatic about coming to the Big 12. I mean, to me, that is so exciting. You know, those 4 schools have been trying to move up to this level for years, and now this is their chance. And so they're ecstatic. And so when you add 4 new members that come in, you know, just fired up to be part of the Big 12, that it's energetic, you know. And I know the Big 12 has had a history of, you know, malcontents and, you know, a little bit of chaos. But we got 4 schools, great schools, that want to be part of us. And to me, that's really exciting. Second part of it is you couldn't have picked a better time to add those 4, especially, you know, if you look at football, Cincinnati, I mean, this past year had an incredible year. BYU's got a long history. Houston over the last decade has been phenomenal, and so is Central Florida. And then if you look at basketball, you go, my gosh, our basketball league, we're the number 1 league in the country prior to this. And now we're going to add 4 schools that are incredible basketball schools. And so the basketball power in the Big 12 is going to be phenomenal. So I just get totally energized by that. And it's going to be so much fun just to see all that come together here over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's also, I had John Cunningham, Cincinnati athletic director, on about a month after the announcement. And we talked about the kind of long runway they had and what they were doing to prepare for it. And there was a history, like you said, of trying to get to this level before his arrival. Cincinnati, they invested heavily. What sticks out to me is the youth of the athletic departments and the institutions. These are younger institutions. They're urban research universities, most of them. So I thought that was, you know, we don't have a lot of those in the Power 5 conferences. And so that was one thing that really stood out. And then you have some natural rivalries coming with them. So I think that'll be a good one for Cincinnati and Houston. And it's also really good to be able to get a new footprint in the Big 12 in some of those areas, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to, you know, there's 4 new road trips, you know, for football games and basketball games and, you know, and quite honestly, for all our sports. I also think, you know, just the relative competitiveness of the 4 schools in comparison to the 8, you know, continuing members. You know, I think there's an opportunity, you know, for 1 or 2 schools to kind of become who's going to be the first one to kind of be king of the mountain, so to speak. You know, and is going to be the school that we look at as, well, that's the best football school in that 12, and that's the, you know, the best basketball or best baseball, and that excites me, especially in football, because right now I'd say it's anybody's opportunity, and Iowa State's as well positioned right now as anyone.
Yeah, and you all have obviously had success the last several years in football. Seeing the Big 12 get up there in the rankings. So adding some very football-friendly schools, I think the competition is just going to continue to be great in the Big 12. So I was excited about the additions. You know, we hear a lot about media rights negotiations, especially with Oklahoma and Texas departing. What the numbers may be for different leagues and their member schools. I'm kind of curious about an athletic director's role in these negotiations. For tactically speaking, someone that's listening that's a senior level administrator, maybe they have never been in a media rights negotiation, whether it's the president taking a step in there or someone on his or her cabinet, and then same thing with senior leaders, or if you contract out for these things, maybe just some inside baseball on how that's actually done in your experience of anytime you have a renegotiation.
Well, you know, ultimately anything that gets decided will have to be run through the board, which is the president's. But typically these situations are managed and led by the commissioner of the conference. You know, they may have a small working group of, you know, a subset of ADs that maybe are part of, you know, quite the broadcast committee. But at the end of the day, it'll be the commissioner of the Big 12. And then more often than not, you're going to bring in a TV consultant that's going to work side by side with the commissioner.
That's great advice. I mean, I think a lot of people might not be aware of what that role is whenever they become the AD, and just to kind of think about that. Speaking of conference commissioners, you already put out a statement on Commissioner Bowlsby announcing that he'll be leaving the conference in the commissioner role. And I know you can't or won't speculate publicly on what the next commissioner position job description needs to look like, and no names. But what skill set, looking ahead at the challenges ahead, obviously industry-wide, but also new additions to the conference, what kind of skill set does the next leader of the Big 12 need to have from the commissioner role?
Well, let me first start by saying, our industry needs more Bob Bowlsbys than not. And so it's a big loss for college sports, for the Big 12, and for those of us that work closely with him personally, it's a big loss because Bob's been a pillar of our industry, and he's somebody that has done a tremendous job on a lot of different fronts. And so a lot of, when I think of what are the traits or skills they need, I can look right at Bob Bowlsby and say, number one, it is a leadership position, and we need somebody that can provide calm, firm hand leadership. They need to have impeccable integrity. They're going to need to, know how to treat people respectfully, but in a tactful way. They have to be a great listener, even if they don't necessarily agree with what they're hearing. They need wisdom because they're going to have to help us work through wherever we get with television. Having relationships with the television partners, I think, would be a big asset. But I also think, we're going to have a television consultant that'll be working hand in hand with somebody. But, the biggest thing is they've got to be a credible leader because you're herding cats, and you've got to be able to go up and down the ladder. You've got to be able to be in the boardroom with the presidents, but you also got to have credibility with the football and basketball coaches, right? And then you've got to be able to have a respectful relationship with the ADs where you can identify with what the ADs are dealing with on their campuses. And so, it's a tough job. It's a tough job, but it takes somebody that, that feels they can go up and down the ladder in a respectful way in their leadership style, and be able to, be a chameleon when they're with the presidents or with the football coaches or with the ADs or the basketball coaches.
I imagine being able to kind of position profile it and say, do we want quote unquote an outsider to come in, or do we want the traditional AD route, or a college president, someone like that, or someone that was in higher education administration? How does that look whenever is it more open to that concept whenever there's so many changes coming to the industry as a whole that, tradition's not going to be restored in every capacity. So maybe it's more attractive to get an outsider, but then you balance that with, well, we can get a consultant or expert in this area. So with so many unknowns, I almost wonder how you pinpoint, trying to come up with that job description anyways.
Well, Travis, I go back to this. I'm going to turn it back to years ago. People, what do we need to get to be an AD? Oh, we need a fundraiser. Oh, no, we need a marketing person. Oh, we need a business person. No, we need an outsider. No, we need a president. What we need is a leader. And I don't really care where their background is. Is it probably, can I envision some backgrounds would have an easier on-ramp to be able to understand what we're doing? Absolutely. But you give me a leader that's engaging, that is analytical, that's impeccable integrity, that's smart. I don't care what their background is, they'll succeed. But it's a leadership position and somebody that can bring credibility to the Big 12, because they got to onboard 4 members. They've got to offboard 2 members. They've got to, negotiate a television deal, and they've got to, manage a staff. And then on top of that, they got to, figure out how to manage all the egos of 10 different, 10 to 14 presidents, depending which year, you're looking at the Big 12, and ADs and basketball coaches, and so that, can't pay a person enough, apparently, because it's a big job.
Yeah, and similar situation right now. I want to ask you about just recent developments. Dr. Mark Emmert, president of the NCAA, announcing he's going to be retiring and leaving the post in 2023, or once they find a replacement. Once again, all the uncertainty. Is it as simple as saying, like, we need a proven leader, or is this the type of position that, from your workings on committees or at the national level, I mean, what is it? I feel like it might even be harder to pinpoint outside of just finding a good leader, as you mentioned. If you're trying to look for a specific profile of a background, with so much uncertainty, specifically leading that staff at the NCAA, I imagine finding someone that can lead that staff in the national office. I feel like a lot of times people think that it's yes, it's just the spokesperson for all the colleges, but there's also a really big staff. I live in Indianapolis, went to school at IUPUI, which shares the land right there with the national office. I mean, so what are your kind of thoughts on Dr. Mark Emmert leaving the post, and then just what the future holds for that position? Because it seems like it's going to get hard for them to find someone that might even be willing to take on that type of leadership position right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's ironic that you followed up the Big 12 commissioner question with a NCAA president question, because, as challenging as I think that the Big 12 commissioner's job is, that job's a layup compared to whoever's going to go in and be the NCAA president. Because, in the Big 12, at least the cats you're herding are defined. You can count them on two hands almost. In the NCAA, you don't have enough toes and fingers to count all the cats you have to herd, and it's also a position that's thankless. President Emmert, has had a lot of arrows thrown at him and spears put in him, and in fairness to him, that's a tough job. It's a totally thankless job, and it's so easy to be critical. And yet, most people that are critical could not do that job for a second. And so, but I do feel like as an organization, it's kind of like, being AD. There's times I really like certain coaches, but we just need to go in a different direction. And I kind of feel like we just need to go in a different direction. And it's not me saying he's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just there's a time. And I think there's a time right now for new leadership. Finding that right leader is going to be really challenging. The board, who will lead that charge, they've got their work cut out for them, because I'm not certain they even know what they need, and they're going to have to figure that out before they even get into this. But we need a credible leader, and try to help us navigate forward, whatever that new, whatever the future holds for the NCAA.
As we kind of wrap up, just throughout all the uncertainty in the future of the Big 12, the NCAA, you're open about your cancer diagnosis. How did you rely on delegation to your staff, and just maybe talk about through the last couple years of everything and ongoing, how do you kind of lean on and delegate the staff at Iowa State?
Well, we have an awesome staff, and most of my top leadership has been with me the whole 17 years. That wasn't the first time. 7 years ago I had a heart attack and had to be out. And, what I've always said, and I really learned it during the heart attack when I was out with open heart surgery, was, judge the culture of an organization during adverse times, not during great times. Because any organization can look like they're clicking on all cylinders when things are going well, but when there's adverse times, and, we've had adversity when I was sick, we've had adversity during COVID, and the cream rises to the top because we've got great leaders that care about this place and rally to support one another. And so in my particular case, I've always said, if I've got to be here to make this place tick, then I didn't do a very good job of leading it. This place needs to run really smoothly, even if I'm not here. And that's because you got to have really great, support people. And that we do. And so that's how we've gotten through it.
Well, Jamie, the last question, just kind of some advice for people in the industry that work in the industry. There's a lot going on, a lot of retirements, a lot of stress, and seeing some people leave the industry. Just kind of your advice for if you made it through the last couple of years and there's a lot of changes coming ahead, maybe you can pull from what excites you about continuing to do the job for so long into challenging situations. What would your advice be for people that are going into staying in college athletics, but getting ready to deal with a lot of change?
Go spend time with your student athletes. Be reminded what we really do. We talked about it this week in our senior staff meeting. All the noise that's going on, and Callie Sanders, who's our senior women's administrator, had been with our women's tennis team at the Big 12 tournament. And she said it was so refreshing to spend the weekend with them because it was just a great reminder that all this noise is noise. They're still really neat young men and young women that we work for. And I think about it meeting with basketball recruits. We've had our star point guard, announced he's leaving, and, everybody's the world's ending, right? Yet I meet with 4 young men and their families as they come through, and they're onboarding at a time that they're looking at, wow, this is a great opportunity and all these things you offer us. And you need those reminders because sometimes the noise can just be so thick and depressing that you forget, what are we really doing? And 99% of our student athletes still are signing up for all the values that most of us stand for, and we can't let the 1% ruin it for the 99%.
Jamie Pollard, Athletic Director, Iowa State University. Thanks for being on Higher Ed Athletics.
Thanks, Travis. I really appreciate it.